from Knitted by Whitney, and I am bringing you a new pattern roundup video today. I have been meaning to do this video for a long time. I've just been busy and I've had a lot going on, and I just haven't had the time to sit down and record this video, but I'm finally able to do that today, and I think you're really going to enjoy this one. I am going to be listing my top 20 beginner-friendly size-inclusive sweater patterns. Now, I have trawled through Ravelry until I have made myself motion sick with scrolling, but I have put together a pretty nice list, and I want to talk a bit about what I think makes a beginner-friendly sweater pattern. I've been knitting for over 5 years now, but I definitely remember what it was like to be a beginner, and I kind of dove headfirst into knitting. I did one basic project and then I did an intermediate project immediately afterwards, much to my chagrin, because the pattern that I tried out as my second pattern I don't have anymore because I didn't have the right skills in order to do it properly, and it unraveled. So it's a shame, but I will eventually remake that pattern someday. So let me sort of talk you through the criteria that I was looking at when I was looking at what I think is a beginner-friendly pattern. So for one thing, these sweaters are fairly straightforward. They are mostly top-down raglans that are knit in the round, and some of them are going to look similar, but they're done by different designers, or they have different little details to them that make them different from another one. A lot of the time they don't include some more complicated instructions. They're usually pretty simple. Some of them do have short rows. I will let you know that right now. So if you're new to short rows, I will include a link in the description below of my favorite short row technique, which is fairly simple to follow. And if you don't want to do that, if you're still too new to sweater knitting and you don't want to do short rows, by all means, it's very easy to just omit that from a sweater pattern. You just skip on to the instructions that follow the short rows instructions, and it doesn't change your sweater very much. It just means that your back and your front of the neck will be parallel rather than the back being slightly higher, which I find makes for a more comfortable neckline. But if those instructions are a little too advanced for you at your stage of knitting, feel free to omit them. I've included both sweaters and cardigans, and I actually do have the odd seamed sweater. I know, those of you who are like me love a good seamless sweater. But if I remember from back when I was a new knitter, I didn't love seaming, and I still don't love seaming, but it does make it easy to follow a pattern when you only need to tackle a little chunk at a time. I remember my first in the round sweater was kind of daunting to me. I did end up making the sweater, and I still have that sweater. I love it so much. That's my wheat sweater, which is just this beautiful brown one with cable details on the sleeves. But I found when I was just starting, like knitting my very, very first sweaters, I found that doing it in pieces actually made it much easier to manage and made me feel more confident as a beginner knitter. And some of the other elements that are in these patterns that I would say constitute beginner friendly is they don't involve anything super, super complicated. And if there is a new technique such as buttons and buttonholes, they're very straightforward to do. They're very easily managed. So that's kind of the criteria that I was looking at when I was determining what patterns I wanted to include. Now, before I get into the list, I just want to talk about the things that you would need to know how to do in order to do any of these sweaters. First and foremost, you need to know how to knit and purl. Those are the basic stitches of knitting, and you need to be able to do them both in the round and flat. Now, I don't think I might have one pattern that involves purling in the round, but for the most part, it's just knitting in the round, and it's knitting and purling flat. So that is all you need to know for the actual stitch patterns themselves. The little details you'll need to know is, of course, you'll know how to cast on, how to bind off, how to pick up stitches, and how to do increases. So there's a variety of styles of increase. If you only know one way of increasing, don't worry, you can always look up the type of increase that's in your pattern into YouTube to look up a tutorial for how to do them. And I have a couple of different styles of increases in the patterns that I have selected, but none of them are going to be scary. None of them are going to be something that you don't know how to do or that you can't learn how to do. So I'm very excited to share these patterns with you. Shall we get into some size-inclusive, beginner-friendly patterns? I think so. Number 1 on my list is by one of my favorite designers. It is the Easy Eyelet Yoke Sweater by Knitatude, or Chantal Miyagishima. This is a really great sweater pattern, and it's one that I think appeals to anybody, no matter their skill level. I love it because it's a really fast knitting pattern. The way that you do your increases for this sweater is with yarn overs, which, if you've never done them before, are very easy to learn, so don't let that scare you off. But they go a lot faster than other ways of increasing your stitches. So that allows this sweater to just fly off your needles, in my opinion. It is a top down in the round sweater made using a circular yoke, and every so many inches you do a round of yarn overs, which when you knit them on the next row creates these lovely little eyelets across the chest of the sweater, which is just a beautiful detail in my opinion, and it's also super beginner friendly. The rest of the sweater is just simply done in the round with the body and sleeves, and it's knit in Aran weight yarn, which is a really great size of yarn to start with because it's right dab in the middle. Number 2 on my list is a set of dual patterns, which I have talked about in at least one of my other videos, possibly a third. This might be the third time I'm mentioning it in a pattern roundup video, but it's a really great one to share with you. And those are the Flax and Flax Lite by Tin Can Knits. The Flax is often the first knitting pattern that somebody learns to make a sweater with because it is super beginner friendly, but also because it's a free pattern. And the Lite is also a free pattern. The Flax is knit using worsted weight yarn, which, like I mentioned for the Easy Eyelet Yoke sweater, is a very good yarn to start with because it's in the middle range of the size of yarn, so it's a really good size to work with. The Flax Lite uses fingering, so if you tackle one of them, I would say Flax would be a little easier to start with simply because your pattern won't take you as long because you're using bigger yarn. But don't let the size of the yarn deter you from doing the Flax Lite because that's another really great option. This one is a top-down raglan that features a nice row of garter stitch along the sides of the sleeves, but if you find that's a little too difficult for you to try and wrap your brain around, you can easily omit that. I've knit the Flax myself, and because it's such an easy pattern to work with and it's also a free pattern, it's very easy to modify to make it look like something else. So I actually did a tunic version of this sweater. I knit it longer than the pattern suggested, and I also did a split hem, and I omitted the garter stitch on the sleeves, and I used 2 different yarns to get this really cool color block effect. Number 3 on my list is the sweater I'm wearing right now, and this is the Lento sweater by Yona Hayatala, I think is how her name is pronounced. But again, I apologize if I pronounce that incorrectly. This is hands down one of my top favorite patterns I have ever knit. Like I mentioned in the beginning of the video, I have been knitting for over 8 years. And this is what I would consider a very beginner-friendly pattern. And I want to knit dozens of this sweater. I adore this sweater. I have been wearing it at least weekly, possibly daily since I finished making it because it is such a wonderful sweater. It goes with so many things in my wardrobe, or rather I make it go with those things because it's quite a bright color. But the shape and the fit and the style, it's just everything I want in a sweater. And it's a great beginner-friendly pattern. This one is also a top-down raglan, but the increases are done using knit back and forths, which I don't often see in a sweater, but it's a very beginner-friendly technique, and it's an easy one to learn, so don't let that put you off. This sweater is knit using a strand of mohair held with a strand of fingering, and that might be a slightly intermediate technique because it's not something that you would necessarily start with if you're just starting to knit a sweater. But it's very easy to hold 2 strands of yarn together. The only thing you need to be cautious of is just to make sure you pick up each loop of your yarn every time you knit a stitch. And if you drop one, it's really not the end of the world, so don't worry about that. What I love the most about it is that you're using small yarn, but you're using big needles. And you get this really nice kind of loose gauge, but it's not see-through because the fuzz of the mohair fills in those gaps. So you can get away with using not a lot of yarn. And especially for me as a plus size person, it's always nice when there's a pattern option out there that doesn't use very much yarn, because we usually have to buy a lot of yarn. If you're like me and you love a cozy sweatshirt, you're gonna love number 4 in my list, another set of dual patterns. They are the Autumn League Pullover and the Winter League Pullover, both by 2 of Wands. These are really great patterns because, again, they are top-down raglans done in the round, but they do have a little detail that kind of makes them shine a bit, and it's not very difficult to do as long as you know your knit and purl stitches. That, of course, is that little V right underneath the neckline of the sweater that mimics that weird V that's on a classic varsity sweatshirt. And that's pretty simple to do as long as you know how to knit and purl. I love these patterns as well because, first of all, the Autumn League Pullover just got overhauled this past year, and Alexi of 2 of Wands completely reimagined it because it originally was a seamed sweater that was done in 3 or 4 hybrid sizes, but she completely overhauled it, redesigned it to be able to be a top-down seamless sweater, and added more sizes so that it is a size-inclusive pattern, and I'm very excited to share it on this list, as well as her Winter League Pullover, which she did 2 years ago, I think, when she released her Hue and Me yarn. So the only difference between these patterns is that the Autumn League Pullover uses worsted weight, and the Winter League uses bulky. And I think the bulky also has a folded neckband, just to make it a little cozier, but they're both very beginner-friendly patterns, and I love Alexi's patterns. They're so classic. They go so nicely with your wardrobe. For number 5 on my list, we're going back to Chantal of Knitatude. She released a couple patterns a few years ago that I think are really great for beginners, and not just because beginner is in the name of them. I'm talking of her My Beginner Raglan Lite and the My Stockinette Beginner Raglan Lite. Both of these use worsted weight yarn, and although Chantal does have a super bulky version of these patterns, I couldn't include those because those ones are not size inclusive. She hadn't started doing her full size inclusive line yet, but the 2 light versions, both made out of worsted weight yarn, are size inclusive and very beginner friendly. Chantal as a designer in general is a really great beginner friendly designer because she knows that that's what most people are looking for when they look at her patterns. So she feeds that into her designs, and she makes sure that whatever she does is either beginner or advanced beginner, and these are no exception. These ones are great if you're just learning because they're both top-down raglans, knit in the round. But the fun thing about the My Beginner Raglan is that it's done in garter stitch. So this one, you're doing garter stitch in the round, which, yes, it's a little extra work, but I think garter stitch is having a bit of a moment right now, and it's a really fun, squishy stitch, and I think it always looks good. So I highly recommend these 2 patterns. Now, to do garter stitch in the round, it's a little bit of extra work because you're knitting one row and then purling the next row. That's how you get the ridges on your sweater. And a lot of knitters don't like to purl because they find that it takes more time. But if you don't mind the extra time, I do recommend that pattern. If you want something that is not quite as slow, take a look at her Stockinette Beginner Raglan Lite. Number 6 is a new to me pattern and a new to me designer, but I found it in my search and I'm really intrigued by this sweater. It's the Easy A sweater by Kat Riddell, also known as The Wayward Knitter. And this is a really fun pattern and super beginner friendly because it's meant to be one of those sweaters that requires as little brain power as possible. It's knit in 2 flat pieces, the front and the back, which are then seamed together up the sides, and you pick up and knit your sleeves in the round from the shoulders down to the cuffs, which I've never thought about it, of doing a sweater that way where you knit your front and back separate, seamed together, and then you do your sleeves in the round. But it makes so much sense as a really beginner-friendly technique because of what I talked about earlier, where you're doing your sweater in smaller pieces and it makes you feel more accomplished to see those pieces knitting up and to get your sweater done that much quicker. I also love that it's knit in bulky weight, which is a very quick knit to work with, which is a very quick size of yarn to work with. And I love the fun style of this sweater, that there's 2 options. There's a cropped length and a longer length. And I really like that the longer length has those really nice slits up the side, which you make just by deciding where you want to start seaming your piece together. And I think that that would just be a really cool, cozy sweater to wear in your everyday life. Now, numbers 7 and number 8, I'm actually going to talk about together, even though they don't technically belong together because they're not the same pattern, knit at different gauges or anything like that, but they're both produced by the same designer, which is Espace Tricot, which is a yarn store based in Montreal here in Canada. And those are their warm-up sweater and bright side sweater. And the reason I want to talk about them together is that they have the exact same construction. They're top-down raglans featuring all of the same details. They have a 2-stitch ribbed neck and cuff and hem, and a stockinette body. But the difference is that they're knit with completely different sizes of yarn, which means they have completely different gauges. So the warm-up sweater uses worsted or Aran weight, and the bright side uses fingering. So take a look at the 2 of them, see which one you would like to make. Would you like to use a thicker yarn and get your project over a little faster, or do you have some beautiful fingering in your stash that you might want to use and you want to use it for a simple sweater such as this? Either or is going to be a good option for you. Number 9 might look a little different than the sweaters that I've shown you so far, but it's a worthy inclusion. This is the Palm Your Knits tee by Knitting Tipsy. And if you're not following Knitting Tipsy on Instagram, I highly recommend it. She is this beautiful ray of sunshine in an internet that can sometimes feel a little too dark. She is all about body positivity. She is fun and goofy. She talks about mental health. She likes to swear. She likes to drink. She's just a really great person to follow if you're into any of those things. And I definitely wanted to include her Palm Your Knits top because it is a really beginner-friendly pattern. It has minimal shaping, it has minimal increasing, and it is a top down in the round sweater. Although this one is more of a circular yoke. It's not a raglan. And I love it because it also doesn't use very much yarn. And it's great if you don't want a standard style sweater. You want something different. This design is going to deliver that for you. You need to use fingering weight yarn, unfortunately, because it uses fingering weight. So it's kind of small. It might take you a little while, but you're going to have fun while you're doing it because it's going to give you a lot of in the round stockinette, which is great when you're just learning how to do a sweater. And it's going to be a fun style for your wardrobe. Number 10 on my list is the first cardigan on the list, and I've included Harvest by Tin Can Knits. I think this one is a great beginner-friendly style because there's no buttons to worry about, and you don't need to know how to do buttonholes. It's a simple open front cardigan, and it's done as a top-down raglan style, and it's knit using worsted weight. So again, it hits all of those points that I've mentioned in the previous patterns about medium weight yarn, simple style to learn, and no tricky details to worry about. I also love that this one is pretty customizable with the length that you want, and if you are an experienced knitter and you do want buttons on this sweater, you'll know how to add them. So it's really great if you're not a beginner as well. Number 11 on my list is something that I would call a fan favorite because it's an Andrea Mowry pattern. And it's one that I've seen a lot of people make and a lot of people talk about. It's her DRK Everyday Sweater, which DRK stands for Drea Renee Knits, which is Andrea Mowry's designing company that she created. And I think this is a great beginner-friendly pattern, and it's a little different than the ones that I've shown so far because it's a cropped style and it has a mock neck. I really like this pattern because I think it's a great piece to have in your wardrobe as just a classic sweater that you can toss on with anything high-waisted, such as a skirt or maybe high-waisted pants, or as Andrea has styled it in some of her photos, with a pair of overalls. I really like that it's got that classic vibe to it, and it's got a circular style yoke, which makes for a really nice fit with the mock neck down to the shoulders. Number 12 on my list is a trio of patterns. I've done a few doubles so far, but this is the only trio on my list, and I've put these all together because they are the Gallant Sweater series by Haggerty. She has the Gallant, which is done with super bulky weight yarn, the Aran Gallant, done with Aran weight yarn, and the Mohair Gallant, done with, you guessed it, mohair yarn. But I've included all three of these together because even though they are wildly different yarn sizes and gauges, it's the same basic construction. And this is the sweater that I would probably say is the most beginner friendly on the list, simply because there's almost no detailing to this sweater. It really is cast on, start knitting, then bind off. There's no ribbing that you need to do around the neck or the cuffs or the hem. There are no details to it, such as the eyelets of the Easy Eyelet yoke sweater. It really is just get in, knit, get out, which is going to be great if you're just learning to knit a sweater. Now, the flip side of that is because they're all done in stockinette in the round, you're going to have curling on your edges. So your cuffs are going to start curling upwards, your hem is going to curl upwards, and if you're not a fan of that look, these patterns might not be for you. But if you just want to learn the basic construction of a sweater to make you feel more confident to go forward and try other sweater patterns that have a few more details to them, this would be a good starting point. Number 13 on my list is another set of two patterns. They are the Cozy Classic Raglan and the Cozy Classic Lite, both by Jessie Maed Designs. I have not knit any of Jessie Maed's patterns yet. I have had the Cozy Classic Raglan on my list to make for quite a while, and I will get to it eventually because I know a few people who have knit this who absolutely love the fit of the sweater, and I'm always after a great fitting sweater. I also really like the details of this sweater. I like the wide band for the neckline of the ribbing, the wide cuffs, the wide hem. I'm very into that look. I have only skinny bands of ribbing on this sweater, and it makes it look a little less polished, I'm gonna be honest. The reason they're small on my lento is because I didn't have much yarn to play around with, but I really love that look of the wider ribbing. I feel like I don't have anything like that in my wardrobe right now, and I would definitely get some good wear out of that. And also, I've been meaning to try a Jessie Maed pattern for a while now because everybody I know who cares about size inclusivity and knitting size inclusive patterns says that she's got great fit to her sweaters. So definitely on my list to make, and I wanted to share them with you as some really great beginner friendly patterns as well. So the Cozy Classic Raglan is knit in DK weight yarn, and the Cozy Classic Lite is knit in fingering weight yarn. So you've got some choices to play with too. Number 14 on my list is the Forager sweater by Melody Hoffmann, also known as Mandarin. I absolutely love Melody's patterns because they just scream cozy to me. I knitted her Into the Woods jumper last year or the year before, I think maybe, and it is one of my coziest feeling sweaters. I absolutely love it, and it has made me eager for more of her patterns, and this one is really great if you're just getting into knitting sweaters. Something that I find really great about her sweaters, if you're just new to sweater knitting, is that they're all oversized fits. So you don't need to worry about making sure that you knit everything perfectly so that you get that perfect fitting sweater, because they're all meant to be oversized anyway. And that to me means that you have less pressure on yourself, especially because I found when I first started learning to knit, I never got a good fit with my earliest sweaters. So if I had found something like this, I would have been really appreciative of the fact that I didn't need to worry about making it fit me very well, because it's all oversized and it's okay if it's a little big. Now, the one thing I will say about Melody's patterns is that she loves to use a specific type of yarn. She loves to use unspun yarn, and her preference is Plötulopi by Espace, which is an Icelandic brand of yarn. And first of all, that's a difficult yarn to get a hold of if you don't live in Europe. Second, it's a tricky yarn to work with because it's not spun, it's a lot weaker, and it's very easy for it to come apart. Once it's knitted, it's a lot stronger, but it's a tricky yarn to work with. And if you're just a beginner, that's not the kind of yarn that you want to start with, because you're going to have all kinds of challenges and it might swear you off trying to make any sweaters. So the thing that I highly recommend about this, and with any pattern really, is substitute the yarn. I have almost never used the yarn that's recommended in a pattern, but especially with Melody's patterns, I have never used an unspun yarn because, first of all, it's hard for me to get a hold of. Second of all, I don't want the hassle of working with a yarn like that. So always check the gauge when you're knitting one of her sweaters, but that's very easy to do, and you should be knitting a gauge swatch with all of your sweaters. It might be a controversial opinion, but I am pro gauge swatch. I always recommend doing it. And always block your gauge swatch. That will give you the proper idea of how it's going to fit. But with Melody's patterns, typically the unspun yarn equals a worsted weight. So that's what I did with my previous sweater that I knit that was one of her patterns. So do a gauge swatch, and unspun yarn typically is about a worsted weight size of yarn. That's my only sort of like hint about Melody's patterns. Otherwise, it's a really easy pattern to follow. Her instructions are really clear, and she usually has some nice video tutorials, so you'll get it. Number 15 on my list is the Powerpuff by Park Williams, or Park and Knit. I think this is a really great pattern if you want to knit yourself a nice spring piece, which, if you can't guess by my vase of tulips here, we're in spring now. Finally here in Nova Scotia. It felt like it took a long time. But pieces like the Powerpuff are great for when you're in between the big seasons and you don't quite know what to wear. You don't want a jacket, but you don't want to go without a jacket. Something like a big cozy knitted cardigan is going to be just the ticket, and the Powerpuff delivers. It's a really fun design. It is cropped. You can definitely lengthen it if you want it to be longer, but it's meant to sort of mimic a bomber jacket. And it's a really beginner-friendly pattern because there's no tricky bits to it. It's knit in garter stitch, so you're going to be doing garter flat and in the round because the sleeves are knit in the round. And then there's that really nice bit of contrasting ribbing along the edges that just really make it shine. It's also knit in super bulky yarn, which means that your pattern will be over before you know it. So I like this pattern for those reasons. Number 16 on my list is the Field Day Cardigan by Ozetta, also known as Haley Smedley. I am new to Ozetta's patterns. I haven't knit one yet, but I have loved every single one that I've seen pop up. And they usually have some intermediate details to them, but I thought that the Field Day Cardigan was a good one to put in with this list. It is, of all the patterns on my list, probably one of the more advanced ones, even though it's still very beginner friendly. But I thought it was a good one to add because there are some nice little details to it that you can still do even if you are a beginner. So the first thing that I liked about it is that there's only 4 buttons that you need to worry about. So that means you only need to make 4 buttonholes. And if you're new to doing a sweater, especially a cardigan, and you have never done buttonholes before, they might seem very intimidating, but this one you don't have to do very many with. I also love that it's an DK weight yarn, which is kind of a middle of the road. That's probably my preferred size of yarn because I find it's the most versatile, and I find that I love the pieces that I make that fit that size the most. And I also love that even though there are some details to it to provide shaping and whatnot, those are pretty simple details to do. They're usually just either done with increases or decreases or with some simple picking up of stitches. So I recommend this pattern for those reasons. Similar to the Field Day cardigan is number 17, the Be Thankful cardigan by Lily Kate France, or I think she's known as Lily Kate Makes sometimes as well. Now, Lily makes some really beautiful feminine pieces if that's your jam, but I really like the Be Thankful because she designed it to be a really classic cardigan fit, but to have those very fun balloon sleeves, which make it a little different than what you've seen so far. And balloon sleeves are very simple to work, so don't be scared of those either. It's just another little detail that you need to do for the sweater, but it's not going to be something that you're not capable of doing. I also really love that you're going to learn a bit of shaping with this as well by doing that really lovely V-neck. And I'm certainly a fan of V-neck cardigans. I find that they fit better with my wardrobe. But I really love all the details of this one, and it's knit in Aran weight yarn, so again, that middle of the road size of yarn, great for beginners. Number 18 on my list is another set of 2 patterns, but this is a duo that's kind of different than the ones I've shown you so far. And that's because it's a masculine and feminine version of the same pattern. I'm talking about the Bibliophile 2 and Bibliophile 3, both by Alicia Plummer. She does also have a Bibliophile sweater, but that one looks too different. It's not the same like these 2 patterns are, so I chose not to include it. What I love about the Bibliophile 2 and 3 is that they're the exact same pattern, but they're graded to different sizing charts. The Bibliophile 2 is graded to a women's sizing chart, and the Bibliophile 3 is graded to men's sizing charts. But that doesn't mean you have to knit one for men and one for women. You can totally change up which one you want to do. For example, Alicia actually shows what the Bibliophile 3 looks like on a female body, just to give you an idea of the more cozy and relaxed fit. I mainly love these patterns because it gives you the option to knit matching sweaters for you and your partner, or for you and someone that you love. And I'm going to be knitting these for Doyle and I. I might be able to tackle them as early as this coming fall, but they'll probably be a next year project. But I'm very excited to be making us matching tweed sweaters. And I think they're a great option to kind of push you to learn knitting sweaters if making something for somebody else is what's gonna get you into sweater making, or if you just want something fun to make for yourself and your partner, whether you are a seasoned knitter or not. Number 19 on my list is my last set of duo patterns, and these are very widely different duos that happen to be the same pattern. Sounds funny, I know. I'm talking about the easy one and the easy bulky one, both by Joji Locatelli. And the reason that they're so different is that, as the name suggests, the easy bulky one is knit using bulky weight yarn, but the easy one is knit using fingering weight yarn. So these are wildly different sizes of yarn that give you the same look in the sweater because they're knit with the exact same construction. Now, I am more likely to suggest the easy bulky one as a way to get into sweater knitting because it's going to take you a lot less time than knitting the fingering weight version. But it's kind of nice to sort of like dip your toe in with the easy bulky one, and then if you really like that construction and you really like the fit of the sweater, you can do it again with fingering weight yarn if you have nice fingering weight yarn that you might want to use. And these patterns are a different construction than I've shown so far. These are knit as drop shoulder sweaters. Now, circular yokes and top-down raglans are both joined in the round and knit down in a sort of circle. But drop shoulder sweaters are knit back first, then you pick up and knit the front, and then you join them together in the round after you knit the space you need for your underarm. Now that might sound a little scary, but trust me, it's not. It's just a different style of construction, and it actually gives you a really nice look to your sweater. I'm a big fan of a drop shoulder. I think it looks really classy, but also very relaxed and cozy. It might mean that you need to pay a little bit more attention to your pattern, do a little bit more measuring than you would with the Raglan or the circular yoke, but you're still going to get a really nice sweater at the end of it. And now for the last pattern on my list, number 20, the Building Block Sweater by Kevin Haggerty, also known as Pearl Jam. Now this one is a super beginner friendly pattern. Kevin has knit his pattern in a way that makes it super accessible if you've never knit a sweater before, because the goal of this pattern is to get you into sweater knitting and to make you feel confident in knitting your very first sweater. And this one is different from all the others that I've shown so far because it is the only, and I can't believe I've done this, the only bottom-up sweater pattern on this list. And the reason why that is because in general, I at least find that it's very tricky to make bottom-up patterns fit me properly. And all of the bottom-up sweater patterns that I started knitting with when I was a beginner failed completely. And so I've kind of gotten into the headspace that bottom-up sweaters are tricky and they're very difficult to fit properly. And in general, I just don't like doing them. But I have confidence in Kevin's pattern because he has so much information about how to make sure your sweater is going to fit you properly. So I'm putting my faith in Kevin. If I want to knit a bottom-up sweater again, I'm going to go for this pattern. Another reason I like it is that it's knit using super bulky yarn. So even if you do have some problems with fit, it's not going to be a lot of time wasted because it doesn't take very long to knit up bulky, because it doesn't take a long time to knit up super bulky yarn. So if you are eager to try your first pattern and you want a lot of extra assistance and you want it to go quickly, I recommend the Building Block Sweater. And that takes us to the end of this pattern roundup video. I really hope you enjoyed this collection of patterns, whether you are a beginner knitter or if you're a seasoned pro, because I really feel like there's something for everyone in this list. If I've missed out one of your favorite beginner-friendly patterns, leave it in the comments below. I'd love to see what I might have missed out. And if you've knit any of these patterns before, also leave a comment below. Let me know what you thought of them. I'd love to know. If you're a new viewer, thank you so much for joining me. And if you're a returning viewer, thank you so much for coming back. I really appreciate it. While you're here, hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. I mainly upload podcast episodes as well as these pattern roundup videos, but there's also some other special videos here on my YouTube channel. I hope this video has given you the confidence to try your first sweater pattern, or maybe giving you an idea of a pattern that you didn't see before and you might want to try even if you're a seasoned knitter. And whatever you choose to do, I hope you all take care and happy knitting.